Today's episode is about something that sounds simple on the surface but is actually one of the most important foundations in cybersecurity operations. Turning a normal Windows machine into something you can actually see through. Not visually, not metaphorically, operationally. We're talking about endpoint telemetry. And more specifically, we're talking about Sysmon on Windows 10. Welcome back.
The Little Root Lab is a homegrown, self-learning journey into IT and cybersecurity, narrated by Simon Arnold. It is being built from the ground up, documenting progression through systems, networking, and SOC concepts as it develops, including the mistakes, the learning process, and the real-world growth that comes with it. It is hoped that viewers find value in the series and are able to take something useful from the journey as it unfolds. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Little Root Lab. And it's late at night, it's 11:30, and I've just spent an hour and a half sorting out Sysmon on Windows 10, and I just want to break it apart for everyone today a little bit because I find it absolutely fascinating, and you might too as well. So the problem most people don't notice is that most computers are blind from a defender's point of view. Have you actually thought about that? Windows will actually run processes, launch scripts, connect to networks, spawn child processes, execute encoded PowerShell, load DLLs, and unless you're explicitly configured logging, you don't actually have a detailed story of what happened. You just get fragments. A security log here, an application log there, and maybe some antivirus events if you're lucky. But not a coherent narrative. And that's the key difference between using a computer and observing a system. So what we're trying to build is the second one, a system where every meaningful action leaves a trace. So I wrote my new CV today and it looks wonderful. If anyone out there is looking for a SOC analyst tier 1 junior, give me a shout. I'd gladly come for an interview with you. Home office would be great, but if you're in Germany, of course, love to also work with everyone and just in the office and start getting the work done really. So reach out to me. I had both systems up. I had Linux all ready to be, the observer computer and Windows to be the endpoint. But it actually turned out to be, just not really frustrating on Windows. But it took about an hour and a half just to get Sysmon up and going. And have to be honest, ChatGPT did lead me down some rabbit holes that I didn't really want to go down, and 5 times, and this is what I'm saying to everyone really, you do have, at some point, you do have your own authority for leading the way, and when you know that, it just gets better and better and better, because you're not just blindly writing stuff that ChatGPT says. You kind of thinking, well, come on a minute, just don't lead me down this alley. Let's get the real job and the real work done. So let's have a look. Let's look at Sysmon and what it's all about really. So the sensor layer, Sysmon or System Monitor, is part of Microsoft's Sys internal suite. It isn't a security product in the traditional sense. It doesn't block anything. It doesn't alert you in a flashy kind of way that we're all used to hearing about. Instead, it does something more fundamental. It records behavior at a very low level inside Windows. Once installed, Sysmon becomes a service that sits quietly in the background and logs things like process creation, for example, what started, when and how. Process termination, when it ended. Because it comes up with that termination all the time. I think that's on number 5 process terminated. Network connections, what connected to what, file creation events, registry modifications, and DLL loading activity. And crucially, it all ties together. It just brings it all together. So instead of seeing the PowerShell ran, you see PowerShell.exe started. And of course, I'm early into the game in cybersecurity here, and it's been flagged up to me. Just maybe some of you can just give me a few pointers on, understanding that every time we see an exe, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it could be. I'd love to know the difference on that one, because I'm still learning. I'm going to be learning all the time, Also from explorer.exe, with a specific command line at a specific time with a specific parent-child relationship. But that's just not logging anymore. That's reconstruction capability. That's investigative infrastructure. And here's what happened really. So Windows 10, all up and running the Ethernet cable to the Fujitsu. I was thinking, what's going on? Is it not actually installing Sysmon? Because I'm the type of person who would rather write on, the administrator on Bash and actually connect to Microsoft rather than using the web browser, But I found that the setup isn't the hard part, it's the verification. It's the verification that is, The installation process itself looks simple. You take sysmon64.exe and run it with an install flag, something like accept the license agreement, install the service, and register the event provider. But after about 45 minutes, I tried to install Sysmon, but the license agreement actually came up like quite a lot later. And then I accepted the agreement, we're going to know everything about you. No, not really, but you know what I mean. All those, I think there's 12 different sections or something on it, and it was fine. It was all right. And then everything happened really. But what matters isn't running the command, it's confirming what changed in the system afterwards. And it's interesting because I'm running root 32, and maybe some of you out there, have touched on looking at the difference between 32 and 64. And I just got to maybe check my notes and see what's going on there. But it did do a good install. And I think when people use Sysmon, tell me in the comments, but when you run the installer, you think you've got telemetry, right? But systems don't work on assumption, they work on verification. So the real workflow becomes install Sysmon, which I did, check whether the service exists. That was with the get function. Check whether the log event channel exists as well. There was a lot of minus i's I was sticking in there, to be honest. Confirm whether events are actually being written, and only after that do you trust the system. Because in security work, remember, visibility is binary. You either have it or you don't. There's no kind of logging in a way. But ChatGPT was, again, I was steering ChatGPT. It sent me down 5 different rabbit holes. I was like, stop faffing about. Let's get down to business. I see the install. First of all, it was, here's the install. And it was like, you've got to do a couple more checks to see if the install is there. And you know what? It kind of led me down it did lead me down the wrong road. And I said, come on, what's going on? And then it brought up the license agreement, and then everything else worked fine after that. So let's come to event IDs. And when you've been playing about with this for an hour and a half, you see quite a lot of 1s and 5s. So event 1 is process creation, event ID 5 is process termination, and event ID 3 is network connections. I don't think I saw any network ID 3s. I saw lots of 1s and 5s though. But at first they look like noise, but they aren't noise, they're fragments of behaviour, and behaviour is what attackers rely on. For example, PowerShell command isn't just a command, it becomes a process tree, a command line string, a parent process relationship, a time-stamped event, and a log channel designed specifically for forensic reconstruction. And this is where the endpoint monitoring starts to feel different from normal system use. You're no longer interacting with the machine, you're observing it. So it actually was a fairly simple process with Sysmon. What I've noticed in Python, when I was writing Python from November, I'm finding Python so much easier to write than actually writing in Bash on Windows 10. Because I live in Germany, of course. It is kind of refreshing though to write on Windows 10 with capitals like get with a big G, Is it get file or something? I'm not sure, but it's quite late at night now. But it's nice to put the capitals in. The muscle memory in my fingers is all there. I don't even need to think about anything. It's just writing it just blindly. It's brilliant, and getting it right. I put in lots of stars actually with, comma, star, Sysmon in small, star, and then comma again. There was a lot of that going on. And when you do the Sysmon setup, you might see events like process terminated, and it could feel reassuring that confirmation that everything is working, but in reality those are just one part of a larger data set, which I kind of learned a little bit later on. Because Sysmon doesn't tell a story in sentences, it tells a story in fragments such as start and run and connect and terminate. And you, as the analyst, reconstruct meaning from those fragments, if you get what I'm on about. So early on, it's completely normal to misread signals or assume something is fully working when only part of the pipeline is active. And that's part of learning endpoint visibility. I'm happy with the hour and 20 minutes because I could see what ChatGPT was doing, but it was faffing about quite a lot. There was a quicker way to get Sysmon all up and running today. The shift from setup to hunting. Once Sysmon is installed and logging correctly, the entire workflow changes. You move from is the tool installed to what is the system actually doing? And that's where SOC thinking begins. The first real hunting exercise is almost always the same. You look at the event ID 1. Because process creation is where almost every action begins. From there you start asking questions like, why does this process start? What spawned it? Is this normal behavior? Does this command line look suspicious? Is there encoded PowerShell? Is there unusual parent-child chaining? This is where investigation begins to look like reconstruction. You're not reacting to alerts, you are building timelines. Let's go on about telemetry a bit here, because telemetry matters more than tools. So one of the most important lessons in this entire setup is that Sysmon itself is not the goal. It's just a sensor. Does that make sense, everyone? Because the real goal is visibility. And tomorrow I'll be then doing... It's so late at night now. I'll be actually running the tests. So without telemetry, guess. With telemetry, you reconstruct. And reconstruction is the foundation of incident response, threat hunting, and even detection engineering. It's the threat hunting that I'm going to be doing tomorrow. It's a new term for me, really. I did a lot of reflection on my learning level, and I've had red team focus in my mind for quite some time, but I've really fallen in love with Bash, doing everything on the command line. So much so that I was thinking about, not using Kubuntu KDE Plasma and moving back to Ubuntu GNOME, really, because I can just type away, you know, and just reconstruct and just construct stuff that really, really works. I love the input. I love the input there, really. It's kind of like the GUI or whatever isn't that important for me anymore. Um, I'm basically knocking out distractions in like minuscule ways. And when you do that, you can see the behavior clearly. So you can start distinguishing normal system behavior, misconfigurations, and actual malicious patterns because my eyes aren't, concentrating on anything else. But none of that is possible without the raw feed first. So if you're looking from an analyst kind of mindset shift, what you're essentially built when you use Sysmon is a translation point between two mental models. So before Sysmon, I use Windows. After Sysmon, I observe Windows. I mean, that shift is pretty subtle actually, but it changes how you think about everything. Processes are no longer invisible, they become traceable entities. PowerShell is no longer just a shell, it becomes a forensic trail generator. And this is what I'm trying to say. It's, for me, I could knock out Plasma, go back to GNOME, and for me, it basically is my forensic trail generator, and I just really can't get enough of the threat hunting kind of stuff that I'm doing. If you listen to the podcast over the last couple of editions, what were we doing? We were doing brute force, and I'm really just finding out my preferences, if that makes sense. I mean, it doesn't take away from, SOC Analyst 1, of course. Thoroughly looking forward to start because it's lovely to have the basics in kind of all the little different fields, so you can put it all together when you start your first job as a junior. You know, um, so even something as simple as Notepad opening becomes a log event in a chain. And if you are just starting up a lab, um, there is the instruction really of opening the notepad and then closing it, right? So that's where that comes in. But over time, you start noticing patterns, what normal process trees look like, what abnormal ones look like, and where attackers tend to hide in execution chains. And that's where the skill starts forming. Not in the tools, but in the interpretation of the tools, you know. But also knowing where to stop. I mean, there's also an important operation lesson in the setup phase as well, knowing when to stop. Endpoint work can very easily become infinite detail changing, and there's always another log, another event, another layer of interpretation. But at some point, the correct decision is simply telemetry is working, logs are flowing, system state is stable, and then you step away. Because analysis is better when the analyst is rested, not when they're forcing interpretation at the edge of fatigue. And that discipline matters in real SOC environments more than most technical skills. When I was out and about doing just shopping today, um, I I did throw up the comment of, you know, all the logs, really enjoying it. And what I can distinguish already is the fact not to get stuck on some kind of minuscule area on the logs that just kind of puts my mind into a loop. So it loops on that. Because I guess the real strength is really um, identifying it, but not concentrating solely on that single log, but then going back, to see what else and the interpretation of what else is happening within the system. So where does it go next then? So once you've returned to the system, the next stage is not set up, it's investigation. So you begin to filter event ID log. You filter the event ID 1 logs. Okay, so you've got event ID 1, 5 and 3. Okay, so with the 1 logs you reconstruct process trees, identify unusual PowerShell usage, because what I've heard on, I'm trying to think of the podcast that I've listened to quite a lot. I've listened to the original Xbox and how, hackers would just get through to the, what was it, the operating system back then, or the BIOS. They would get through to the BIOS, change the BIOS, and then just get all the games and stuff like that back then. I have to put a link into the podcast that I'm listening to, but a hell of a lot of the investigation which I've heard for cybersecurity is really through the PowerShell, and it's just repeating itself again and again, really. We also trace parent-child execution chains, we build timelines of system activity, and eventually you move from raw logs to hypotheses. Is there a hypothesis or just a hypothesis? Whatever. Does this process exist? What sequence of events led there? Does the match known attack patterns? And it is where endpoint hunting becomes real, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to tomorrow. But the endpoint hunting becomes real not because the tools are complex, because your understanding of behavior has deepened. So what's been built here isn't just Sysmon on a Windows machine, it's a foundation for visibility. It's a way to turn a black box system into something observable, reconstructible and analyzable. Is that actually a word, analyzable? I got no idea. And once that foundation exists, everything else in security operations becomes easier, not because the work gets simpler, but because you're no longer guessing, You're seeing, and that changes everything. And just before I bring this into a landing, really, are there any questions that I want to know from you guys? I'd love to know a little bit more about the event logs 1, 3 and 5. I don't think I saw event logs 3, so maybe you could put that in the comment. What else? Do most of you prefer using the command line to even on Linux do a sudo shutdown now, or do you actually prefer to come out of that, go on to onto the desktop and do it more manually? I'd love to know about that, really. And just give me some indication on whether these podcasts are helping you. Tomorrow is going to be fun. Tomorrow we are going into threat hunting a lot deeper. I love the area, I think it's fantastic, and hope you can join me. So have a nice night, and I'll catch you tomorrow.